I have killed more living things than there are stars you can count from your homeworld. I am old now. My hands shake when I hold the cup. And I am telling you, the bravest thing I ever saw in 200 years of war was a human who refused to kill when killing was the easy thing. Sit, let an old soldier talk. I do not have many seasons left in me, and there is one story I have never told the way it actually happened. I told the official version 100 times. I told it to my commanders, to the war tribunals, to the young ones who came to me wanting glory. But the official version is a coward's version. It leaves out the part that matters. So tonight I will tell it true. My name is Karavash. Among my people, the Veshtal, I was once called Spear of the Fourth Line, which is a name they give to officers who are expected to die well and be replaced quickly. I did not die. That, you will see, was the first thing the humans taught me, though I did not understand the lesson for many years. You have to understand what we were back then. The Veshtal did not lose wars, not because we were braver than other peoples or wiser or favored by any god. We did not lose because we did the mathematics first. Before a single soldier set foot on enemy ground, our calculators measured everything. How many we had against how many they had. How thick their walls, how deep their water, how long their food would last. We did the sums, and when the sums said the outcome was certain, we declared it, and the enemy, knowing our reputation, would yield. They would lower their banners. They would step into our order, become part of the Veshtal Reach, and in 2 generations their grandchildren would speak our language and forget they had ever been anything else. This was not cruelty to us. It was kindness. Why should anyone die in a fight already decided? A people who surrendered when the numbers said surrender lived on. A people who fought a hopeless fight were simply Chinese letter, pruned. The way you prune a tree of a branch that will not bear. We told ourselves this for 10,000 years. We believed it the way you believe the ground will hold your weight. And then we came to a small, cold world at the edge of a thin and unimportant arm of the galaxy. And we met the humans, and the ground did not hold. The world was called Tarn's Reach. I remember the name because the humans said it strangely, with a soft sound at the end, almost like a sigh. It was a frontier colony, the kind of place your species throws out into the dark the way a sower throws seed, not expecting all of it to take, just enough. There were maybe 40,000 humans on the whole planet when we arrived. 40,000. We came with a fleet that carried 200,000 soldiers, and behind that fleet were the heavy ships, the ones that did not need to land at all, the ones that could simply unmake a city from orbit if the ground forces asked them to. The mathematics were not close. The mathematics were an insult. I remember the briefing. I remember my commander, a vessel named Tovish, standing before the projection of that little gray planet, and I remember the way he barely bothered to raise his voice, because there was nothing to be excited about. He said the campaign would be over in 11 days. He said the humans were primitive, that their colony was barely armed, that they had a handful of old defense ships and some mining equipment they might try to turn into weapons. He said we would land, we would broadcast the demand, and the humans would do what every sensible people had done for 10,000 years. They would yield. We landed in the cold season. I want you to feel it the way I felt it, stepping off the dropship onto that ground for the first time. The cold came up through the soles of my boots and into my bones. Veshtal do not love the cold. Our blood runs slow in it and we move worse. The sky was the color of dirty metal, low and heavy, and a fine ash snow was falling, not real snow, I learned later, but the dust thrown up by some long-dead volcano on the far continent, drifting down forever over everything. It got into the joints of my armor. It got into my breathing slits and made me cough. Everything on that world was the color of old bone. We landed outside their main settlement, a sprawl of low buildings they called Bridgewater, built along the banks of a slow black river. We did not attack. That was not how it was done. We made our lines, we set our guns, we surrounded the place, and then we waited for the demand to be transmitted. The demand was always the same. We have measured you. You cannot win. Lower your banners and you and your children will live. Refuse and we will prune you and the galaxy will not even remember your name. I stood in the line that first day and I watched the human settlement across the frozen field. I had my long glass up to my eyes. I expected to see panic. I had seen it on other worlds. The running, the burning of documents, the desperate messages flying back and forth as the leaders argued about how to surrender with the most dignity they could keep. That is not what I saw. I saw humans on the rooftops setting up firing positions. I saw them digging. I saw them moving children and old ones not toward us with hands raised, but away into the deep mines under the city where our orbital weapons could not reach. I saw them working in the cold and the ash with a kind of grim steadiness that I did not have a word for. They were not panicking. They were preparing. And the strangest thing, I remember lowering the glass and standing very still, because something about it disturbed me at a level I could not name. The strangest thing was that they had already received our demand. We had transmitted it. Our calculators had shown them the numbers. They knew, exactly as well as we did, that they could not win. And they were getting ready to fight anyway. I went to my commander. I was young then, only 60 years old, barely past my first century, and I still believed that everything could be explained if you found the right person to explain it. I said, Veshel Tovish, the humans have received the demand and they have not yielded. He did not even look up from his readings. He said they were primitive, that they did not understand the numbers, that fear had made them foolish. He said give them another day. He said hunger is a patient teacher. He said when the children began to cry from empty stomachs, the parents would do the sensible thing. So we waited another day, and then another, and the humans did not yield, and they did not yield, and on the fourth day they did something that no people had done to the Veshtal in my lifetime. They attacked first. It was night, their night, long and bitter. The ash snow had stopped and the cold had gone hard and clear, the kind of cold that feels like it is listening. I was in the forward trench with my line, half of us dozing in our armor because nothing happens at night in a siege. The enemy hides in their walls and waits to die slowly. That is what sieges are. That is what we knew. The humans came out of the ground. Not over it, out of it. They had mining equipment, you understand, drilling machines, tunneling rigs, the tools they used to dig the metals out of that frozen rock. And in 4 days, while we waited for them to grow hungry and afraid, they had dug. They had tunneled under the frozen field, under our forward lines, and they came up in the middle of us in the black of night with cutting tools and mining charges and old hunting rifles. And for the first time in my life, I heard the Veshtal scream. I will not pretend I fought bravely that night. I fought the way an animal fights when something has it by the throat. There was a human in front of me in the dark, small, they are all small. You have to understand how small they look to us, the tops of their heads at my chest. And it had a mining tool, a thing for breaking rock, and it swung it, and the sound my armor made was not a sound I had ever heard my armor make. I struck back. I am ashamed to say I do not remember if I killed that one. There were too many. They came up out of the dark in their hundreds, and they did not fight like soldiers. They fought like people defending the only ground their children had left to stand on. By the time the sun came up, a thin gray sun, barely warming anything, the human attack had broken and pulled back into their tunnels. We had held the line. The mathematics in the end were the mathematics, and there were only so many humans and they could not break 200,000 of us with mining tools. But when I walked the trench in the gray morning light, I counted our dead and I stopped counting because the number was wrong. The number was a number that should not have happened in a siege already won. They had killed 9 of us for every one of theirs we found. 9. With rock cutters and hunting rifles, against the finest soldiers in that arm of the galaxy. And I stood there in the ash and the cold, looking at the bodies of soldiers I had trained beside, and for the first time in my life a thought came to me that I did not know how to hold. The thought was, the numbers are lying to us. The thought was, there is something in these small soft creatures that the calculators cannot measure. I did not say this thought out loud. You did not say things like that in the Veshtal, not if you wanted to keep your rank and your name. I pushed it down. I told myself it was the shock of a hard night. I told myself the humans had gotten lucky, that desperation had made them dangerous the way a cornered beast is dangerous, that it would not last. The campaign would still end. Maybe not in 11 days, but it would end the way all our campaigns ended. But it did not end. The humans pulled back into Bridgewater and into their minds, and they made us bleed for every street, every building, every meter of frozen ground. They did not have the weapons to win. They knew they did not have the weapons to win. And they fought us anyway, day after day after day, in a way that was not desperate anymore but had become something steadier and colder and far more frightening. The fight of a people who had decided, all of them together, that they would rather die standing on their own ground than live a long, comfortable life having handed it over. I had never seen anything like it. None of us had. We started to talk about it among ourselves in low voices, the way soldiers talk about things their commanders do not want to hear. We had a name for surrender in our language, Veshtoran, the wise yielding, the choice that lets a people survive. We had no name for what the humans were doing. There was no word in 10,000 years of Veshtal history for a people who looked at certain death and said no. It was the older soldiers who frightened me most, because the older ones had seen 100 campaigns and even they had no answer. There was one, an ancient gunner named Drail who had fought before I was born, and one night he said something to me by the fire that I have never forgotten. He looked across the dark field toward Bridgewater, where the human cooking fires made small orange points in the blackness, and he said, "Caravash, I have conquered 11 worlds." On every one of them, when the people understood they could not win, they stopped fighting. That is not weakness. That is the most ancient wisdom there is. He turned and looked at me, and his old eyes had something in them I did not like. He said, "But these creatures do not have that wisdom, and I cannot decide if it means they are fools or if it means they know something we have forgotten." I think about Drail often, now that I am as old as he was then. He did not live to learn the answer. He died 3 days later in a street in Bridgewater, killed by a human child of maybe 12 seasons who had hidden in a doorway with a rifle longer than she was tall. I saw it happen. I saw the child's face afterward for just a moment before she ran, and there was no triumph on it, no hate. There was only a kind of terrible, exhausted grief, the face of someone who has done a thing they will carry forever, and did it anyway because the thing had to be done. I want you to remember that face. I will come back to it. The campaign that was supposed to last 11 days lasted 4 months. 4 months in that cold, in that ash, in that endless gray, while a colony of 40,000 farmers and miners held off the finest army my people had. We were winning. I want to be honest. We were always winning. The mathematics do not stop being the mathematics just because they cost more than expected. We took Bridgewater street by street. We drove the humans back into the mines and the hills. Their numbers fell, and ours fell faster than they should have but slower than theirs. And any calculator in our fleet could have told you the day it would all be over. But something was happening inside me, and inside many of us, that no calculator measured. We had come to that world certain that we were the strong ones and the humans were the weak ones who simply had not yet had the sense to admit it. And every day on that frozen ground, that certainty cracked a little more. Because strength, we had always believed, was the power to make others yield. And here were these small creatures with their inferior weapons and their hopeless cause, and they would not yield, would not, no matter what we did to them. And slowly, terribly, I began to understand that there is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with the power to win. There is a strength that is simply the refusal to break. And we did not have it. We had never needed it. We had always been the ones who could not lose. And so we had never learned what to do when losing was certain and you fought anyway. I did not know yet that I would learn it. I did not know that in a few weeks I would be lying in the freezing dark with my blood running out into the ash, certain I was about to die, and that a human would find me, an enemy, a thing that by every law of war should have finished me where I lay, and that what that human chose to do in that moment would unmake everything I thought I knew about strength and weakness and what it means to win. But that is the heart of the story, and I am an old soldier, and old soldiers take their time. Let me tell you first about the day everything changed. Let me tell you about the bridge. It was near the end of the third month. The humans had been pushed almost entirely out of Bridgewater by then, back across the slow black river into the mining hills on the far side. There was one crossing left, an old metal bridge, narrow, the kind of thing built to carry or haulers, not armies. Both sides knew that whoever held the bridge controlled the river, and whoever controlled the river controlled the last of the fight. So we went for the bridge, and the humans went for the bridge. And what happened there was the worst day of fighting in the whole campaign. And it was on that bridge, in the smoke and the cold and the noise, that I first saw the human whose name I would never forget. I did not know her name yet. I would learn it later in the dark, when I had no reason left to live and she gave me one. But I saw her first on the bridge, and I will tell you exactly what I saw, because it is important, because it was the first time I understood that I was fighting something I did not understand at all. We hit the bridge at dawn. Our orders were simple: take it, hold it, push across. We came in 3 lines heavy, the way the Vestal always came, certain that weight and order would carry the day the way weight and order always had. The humans met us on the bridge with everything they had left, which was not much, and the fighting was as close and ugly as fighting ever gets, body against body on a narrow span of metal over black freezing water, with the ash falling again, soft and gray, like the world itself had given up and was coming apart in flakes. And in the middle of it, in the absolute worst of it, where the dying was thickest, there was a human who was not killing anyone. She was small even for a human, and she wore a faded red cloth tied around one arm, and she was running into the place where the fighting was worst, not away from it, into it, and she was dragging the wounded out. Hers and ours. That is what stopped me. That is what I could not understand. She was dragging her own wounded back. Yes, that I could understand. That is what any people would do. But she was also stopping at the Vestal who lay broken on that bridge, at us, at her enemies, at the soldiers who had come across the stars to take her world from her. And she was kneeling beside them in the middle of the killing, and she was trying to stop their bleeding. I saw her do it. I saw her kneel beside a Vestal soldier whose leg had been taken off below the knee, an enemy, one of the creatures that had come to unmake her entire world, and I saw her press her small hands against the wound and shout for someone to help her. And when no one came, she tied her own red arm cloth around the stump to slow the blood, and then she moved on to the next one, ours or hers. It did not seem to matter to her which. I stood there in the middle of a battle and I could not move. One of my own lines shouted at me. I did not hear him. I was watching this small human in the ash and the smoke moving among the dying like she was the only one on that whole bridge who had not lost her mind. And the thought came to me again, the thought I had pushed down for 3 months, and this time I could not push it back down. The numbers are lying to us. There is something here the calculators cannot measure. We took the bridge. The mathematics do not stop. By midday it was ours, and the humans had pulled back into the hills, and the campaign was as good as decided. I should have been thinking about the victory. Instead, I stood at the end of that bridge as the smoke cleared, and I looked for the small human with the red cloth, and I could not find her among the living or the dead, and I was surprised. I was deeply, disturbingly surprised to find that I hoped she had lived. I did not understand that hope. It made no sense. She was the enemy. She had probably saved the lives of human soldiers who would kill more of my people tomorrow. By every law I had ever lived by, I should have wanted her dead. And instead I stood at the end of a bridge I had helped to take, and I hoped, with a strange ache I had no name for, that the small creature who had knelt beside her enemies and tied her own red cloth around their wounds was somewhere out there in the cold, still alive, still breathing. That was the first crack. The bridge was where it began. What I did not know What I could not have known, standing there in the smoke, was that in 3 days I would be the one lying broken in the ash, that I would be the enemy on the ground with my blood running out, and that the small human with the red cloth would find me and kneel beside me, and that what she did next would be the thing I have spent the rest of my long life trying to understand. I told you I would take my time. An old soldier earns that. But the heart of it is coming, and when it comes, I will not look away from it, because she did not look away from me, and I owe her that much. I owe her more than that. I owe her everything I became after. Her name was Wren Holloway, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I came to be lying in the dark, dying, in the hands of the people I had come to destroy. After the bridge, my commanders decided to finish it quickly. They had grown tired of the cold and the ash and the humans who would not do the sensible thing, and there was talk in the fleet, ugly talk, about simply calling down the heavy ships and unmaking the hill mines from orbit, ending the whole stubborn business in an afternoon of fire. Veshel Tovish would not allow it. I will say that for him. He was a hard creature, and I did not love him, but he had an old soldier's pride, and he said it was a disgrace to win a war from orbit that you had failed to win on the ground. He said we would go into the hills and take the mines the proper way, soldier against soldier, and we would do it before the cold season ended. So they sent us into the hills. I want you to understand what that meant. The humans had been mining that world for 2 generations. The hills above Bridgewater were not hills the way you think of hills. They were honeycombed, hollowed out, threaded through with tunnels and shafts and old workings that went down farther than any of our maps showed. The humans knew those tunnels the way you know the rooms of the house you grew up in. We did not know them at all. To go into those hills after the humans was to go into the dark, on their ground, in a maze they had built and we had not, against a people who had already shown us they would rather die than yield. The older soldiers knew it was madness. I heard them say so, quietly, the way you say a thing you know your commander does not want to hear. But the orders came down and we went, because that is what soldiers do. I led a forward line of 40 into the eastern workings, 40 good soldiers. I knew most of their names. I want to tell you their names, but I will not, because I cannot say them all, and to say only some would be a kind of lie. 40. Remember the number. The tunnels were black and cold, and they dripped. The air was thin and tasted of iron and old rock. Our lights threw long crawling shadows, and every shadow looked like a human waiting, and after the first hour your nerves were so stretched that you could hear your own hearts beating. We moved slowly, the way you move when you cannot see and you know the enemy can. The humans had cut their lights. They did not need them. They had grown up in the dark of those mines. We were the blind ones down there. For the first time in the whole war, we were the blind ones. They let us come deep. That was the thing I understood too late. They let us come deep, deeper than was wise, down past where our maps ended, into a wide old gallery where 2 great shafts crossed, and then they brought the roof down behind us. I felt it before I heard it. The whole mountain shuddered. Then the sound came, a roar that was not really a sound anymore, but a thing you felt in your chest and your teeth, and the tunnel we had come in through filled with falling rock and dust, and the way back was simply gone. 40 of us, sealed in the dark, deep in the enemy's ground. And then the humans came out of the side passages, the ones we had walked past without seeing, and they came at us in the dark where they could see and we could not, and they did to us in that gallery what we had been doing to them for 3 months. They pruned us. I will not tell you it was a battle. It was not a battle. A battle is 2 sides who can both see. This was a slaughter in the dark, and we were the ones being slaughtered, and the worst part, I have never told anyone this part. The worst part was that they did not scream when they killed us, the way we screamed when they killed us. They were silent. They moved through the dark and the falling dust like they were a part of it, like they were the mountain's own grief-given hands, and they took us apart with a terrible quiet efficiency, and the only sounds were our screaming and the rock still settling, and somewhere far back, A single human voice calling out orders in a steady, level tone, never rising, never afraid. I do not know how long it lasted. In the dark, with your friends dying around you, time is not a thing that means anything. I fought. I fought the way I had fought on the first night, like an animal with something at its throat. And then something hit me. I never saw what, a charge, a piece of falling roof, I will never know. And there was a white light behind my eyes and then nothing. And then I was on the ground, on the cold, wet rock, and I could not feel my legs, and there was a wetness spreading out from under me that I knew, even half-conscious, even stupid with the blow to my head, was my own blood. The fighting moved away. The screaming stopped. The humans had finished what they came to do, and they were leaving, moving back through their tunnels, and I lay there in the dark and the cold with my blood running out of me into the rock, and I understood that I was going to die. I was not afraid. That surprised me. I had expected all my life that when death finally came for me I would be afraid, the way the conquered peoples were afraid, the way I had seen fear on the faces of the worlds we broke. But there in the dark I was not afraid. I was only tired and cold and sorry in a deep and total way I had never felt before. Sorry for the 40 I had led into that hole. Sorry for the child in the doorway with the rifle longer than she was tall and the grief on her face. Sorry, even, for the humans, for all of it, for the whole stupid bleeding business of one people crossing the stars to take another people's only ground. I lay in the dark and I felt my long life draining out of me into the cold rock of a world that was not mine, and I thought, this is what it is. This is what we did to all of them. This is what it feels like. And then there was a light. It was a small light, a hand light, the kind the human miners carried. It came bobbing through the dark toward me, and behind it I could hear footsteps, small, careful footsteps picking through the rubble and the dead. I thought, now it ends. They are coming to finish the wounded. It is what we would do. It is what any sensible people would do. You do not leave a living enemy at your back. You do not waste mercy on a creature who would not waste it on you. I closed my second eyes and waited for it. I was almost grateful. At least it would be quick. The footsteps stopped beside me. The light came down close, and through my half-open first eyes I saw her face. It was the human from the bridge, the small one. There was a faded mark on her arm where the red cloth had been. She had given the cloth away, I realized later, to staunch some wound, hers or someone else's, and never gotten it back. Her face was streaked with dust, and there was a cut over one eye, dried dark, and she looked so tired, so terribly tired, the way you only get when you have been doing a hard thing for too long and there is no end to it in sight. She looked down at me, an enemy soldier, one of the creatures that had killed her friends and burned her world, lying broken and bleeding in the dark on the ground her people had just won at a terrible cost. And I watched her face, and I waited to see the thing I had seen on every conquered world, the hate, the fear, the cold satisfaction of the victor over the broken. I had earned it. I deserved it. I had led 40 soldiers into her home to take it from her. I did not see any of those things. What I saw on her face, in the small bobbing light, in the cold, in the dark, in the dust, was something I had no name for, the same thing I had no name for on the bridge. She looked at me dying on the ground, her enemy, and her face did something I will never forget as long as I live. It crumpled, just for a moment, like the sight of me hurt her. Like the sight of any living thing in that much pain, even a thing that had come to destroy her, was a wound to her that she felt in her own body. She knelt down, in the dark, beside her enemy, with her friends dead all around us and her hands already shaking with exhaustion. She knelt down beside me, and she set the light on the rock, and she reached out with her small dust-streaked hands toward the place where my blood was running out into the cold. I did not understand. I want you to know that in that moment I did not understand at all. I thought, in my failing, foolish, dying mind, that she was searching me, that she was going to take something, a weapon, intelligence, a trophy. It was the only thing I could imagine, because in all my long life I had never once imagined the thing she was actually about to do. I tried to speak. I do not know what language came out, Veshtal probably, which she could not have understood. But she looked up at my face when I made the sound, and our eyes met, my four and her two, enemy and enemy in the dark at the bottom of a broken world. And she said something to me, quietly, in her own tongue which I did not yet speak but which I would later learn well enough to know exactly what she had said. She said it the way you would say it to a frightened animal or a hurt child, low and steady, no judgment in it at all. She said, "It's okay, I've got you, don't move." And then this human, this enemy, this small exhausted creature whose entire world I had crossed the stars to destroy, pressed her bare hands against the wound in the side of the thing that had come to kill her, and began, with everything she had left, to try to keep me alive. That is where I will stop tonight. Not because the story stops there, it does not, the heart of it is only just beginning, but because I am old, and that memory still takes something out of me, even now, even after all these years. I will tell you the rest. I will tell you what she did, and what we said to each other in the dark in the days that followed, and the impossible thing she risked to keep me breathing, and the choice I had to make at the end of it all that decided not just my life but, in a strange way, the lives of everyone on that cold gray world. I will tell you what the alien veteran learned about humans on the battlefield, and I promise you it is not what you think, and it is not what I thought, and it took me 200 years to understand even a part of it. But that is for next time. For now, just hold this in your mind. I went to that world certain I was the strong one, and I learned what strength was from a small tired creature kneeling in the dark, with blood on her hands that was not her own and was not even her kind's, choosing, when nothing and no one would have blamed her for doing otherwise, to save the life of her enemy. Her name was Wren Holloway, remember it, I have never stopped saying it. I told you she pressed her hands against my wound in the dark. Let me tell you what came after, because the truth of it is harder than the moment, and the moment was hard enough. I did not lose consciousness right away, though I wanted to. I lay there on the cold rock while this small human worked over me, and I felt her hands moving, quick and sure, the way hands move when they have done a thing many times before and stopped having to think about it. She was talking the whole while, low and steady, that same voice you use for a frightened animal. I did not have her words yet, but you do not need words to understand a voice that is trying to keep you from being afraid. That, it turns out, is older than any language. Every living thing that has ever been hurt knows that sound. She got the bleeding slowed. I do not know how. Veshtal are not built like humans, our blood does not run in the same places, and she could not have known where to press. And yet she found it by feel, by some stubborn refusal to let a living thing die in front of her even when she did not understand how it was put together. Later, much later, when I could ask her, she told me she had just looked for where the most blood was coming out and pushed there as hard as she could and prayed it would be enough. She said it like it was nothing, like it was obvious. To her, it was obvious. That was the thing about them I kept running into, again and again. The things that were obvious to humans were things my whole civilization had no words for. When the bleeding was slowed, she did a thing that I still cannot fully account for. She could have left me there. The bleeding was stopped. Her work, by any reasonable measure, was done. I was an enemy, and she had already done more for me than any law of war required. She could have stood up and walked back to her people and left me to live or die as the cold decided. She did not leave me. She got behind me, and she got her small arms under mine, and she began to drag me. You have to understand the size of us. I am tall even for a Veshtal, and in my armor I weighed more than 3 of her. And she dragged me anyway, a hand's breadth at a time, through that broken gallery, over the rubble and the rock, and I am sorry to say it, but it is true, over the bodies of my own soldiers, the 40 I had led into that hole. She dragged me through them. She was crying, I think, though it was dark and I could not be sure, and she never made a sound about it. She just kept pulling, and resting, and pulling, her breath sawing in and out, her small body shaking with the effort, hauling the broken weight of her enemy through the dark, because the alternative, leaving a hurt thing to die alone, was a thing she apparently could not make herself do. She got me to a side chamber, an old worked-out pocket in the rock, off the main gallery where the dead were. And there she stopped, and there, for the first time, I let the dark take me. When I woke, I did not know how much time had passed. There was a small light burning, not the hand light, that was gone, but a little oil flame in a tin can, throwing a warm, unsteady glow on the rock. And there she was, sitting against the wall with her knees drawn up and her head down, asleep, or nearly, keeping watch over an enemy in the dark. When I moved, she came awake all at once, the way soldiers do, her hand going to something at her belt, and then she saw my eyes open, and she did not reach for the weapon. She stopped. She looked at me, and she said something and pointed at herself and said it again, slower. I understood after a moment what she was doing. She was telling me her name. Ren, she said, and again patient, Ren. I could not make the sound the way she made it. Vestal mouths are not human mouths. But I tried, and what came out was close enough, and when she heard me try, something happened on her face, a small, tired, astonished kind of smile, the first I had ever seen on a human up close, and I want to tell you it was the strangest and most disarming thing I had ever witnessed. A creature whose world I had come to destroy, smiling at me in the dark because I had managed to say her name. I told her mine, Karavash. She could not say it right either. She landed somewhere around Kara and gave up on the rest, and from then on that was what she called me, Kara. No Vestal had ever called me anything so soft. That is how it began. Two enemies in a hole in the ground, trading names by the light of a flame in a tin can, neither of us with the words to say anything that mattered, both of us trying anyway. The days that followed, and I think there were 6 of them, though down there it was hard to be sure, were the strangest of my long life. I have fought in wars across this whole arm of the galaxy. I have stood on the bridges of warships and walked the surfaces of dead worlds. None of it changed me the way those 6 days in the dark changed me, because in those 6 days I learned my enemy, one small piece at a time, and you cannot learn your enemy and keep hatting them. That, I think, is why we never let ourselves learn the peoples we conquered. We measured them. We did not learn them. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. She brought me water. That was the first thing. There was a seep in the rock somewhere in those workings. And she went and came back with water in a battered tin cup, dented all down one side, the kind of thing a miner carries for years until it is more dense than cup. She held it to my mouth and let me drink, and then, and this is the small thing that I have never forgotten, the small thing that broke something open in me, then she drank from the same cup, after her enemy's mouth had touched it. I know how small that sounds, but you have to understand the Vestal. We did not share. Sharing was for equals, for kin, for your own line. You did not drink after a stranger, and you certainly did not drink after an enemy. To do so was to say, you and I are the same kind of thing. And this human, without thinking about it, without it even seeming to occur to her that it might mean anything, drank from the same dented cup as the alien soldier she was keeping alive, because there was one cup and we were both thirsty, and to her it was that simple. We were both thirsty. We were both, underneath everything, the same kind of thing. That cup, I will come back to that cup. I have it still. It is the only thing I took from that world. It sits on the shelf above where I sleep, dented all down one side, and I have drunk from it every day of my life since, and I will tell you at the end why. She talked to me in those days. She knew I could not understand, but she talked anyway, the way lonely people talk, the way frightened people talk, the way people talk when there is a war on and the talking is the only thing keeping the war outside the door. I learned her words slowly. I'm old now and my memory is not what it was, but I will never lose the words I learned in that hole because I learned them from her mouth in the dark with my life in her hands. Water, cold, sleep, hurt, better, her name. My name. And one word she said often, touching her own chest when she said it, that I did not understand for a long time, a word that meant, I learned eventually, family. She had lost hers, most of them, in the fighting. I worked this out from her face and her hands and the way her voice broke on the word, long before I had enough of her language to be told it plainly. I had helped to do that. I want to be honest with you here in the dark of my own old age. The war that killed her family was my war. The soldiers who did it were my soldiers. By every accounting that mattered, I was one of the things that had broken her world and taken her family from her. And she knew it. She was not a fool. She knew exactly what I was and exactly what my people had done. And she kept me alive anyway and shared her water with me anyway and learned my name anyway. Not because she had forgiven it. I do not think she had forgiven it. I think it was something harder and stranger than forgiveness. I think she had simply decided that whatever I had done, I was, right now, in front of her, a hurt living thing, and that was a kind of fact that came before the war, that the war could not reach. I do not have a Veshtal word for it. I am not sure your language has one either. The closest I can come is this. She refused to let the war be the last word about what one person owes another. She would not give it that much. That is what humans are, I think. At the bottom of all of it, under the fighting and the stubbornness and the refusal to yield, that is the thing. They will not let the war be the last word. We were a people who let the numbers be the last word. They were a people who would not, who could not, who would drag their enemy bleeding through the dark a hand's breadth at a time rather than let the war decide who deserved to live. But I am telling you the soft part, and there was a hard part too, and I have to tell you the hard part or this is just a story about a kind human, and it was never only that. Because her people came looking. There were other humans in those tunnels, the ones who had killed my 40, the ones who had brought the roof down. They were her people, her command. And they did not know she had a living Veshtal hidden in a worked-out pocket of the mine. If they had known, I do not think it would have gone well for either of us. There was a war on. I was the enemy. And she was, by hiding me, by feeding me, by keeping me alive, doing a thing that her own people could only have understood one way. I learned this slowly from her fear. She would go out to get water to scavenge, to do whatever she did in the dark passages. And when she came back, she was always listening, always watching the way we had come. And once on the 4th day, voices came down the tunnel and she went absolutely still and put out the little flame with her fingers and pressed herself against the rock beside me in the total dark. And I could feel her heart going like a small animal's against my arm. The voices passed. They went away, but I understood in that dark exactly what she was risking. She was risking everything, her own people for an enemy. And here is the thing I have to confess to you, the thing that is the real climax of this story, the thing I have never told anyone. Because in that dark, with the voices passing, I had a choice, and I want you to understand the choice fully before I tell you what I did. By the 4th day I was strong enough. Not well, I would not be well for a long time, but strong enough. Strong enough that, if I had wanted to, I could have overpowered her. She was small and exhausted, and she slept beside me every night with her weapon at her belt, trusting me, an enemy soldier she had known for 4 days. I could have taken her weapon. I could have killed her quietly in her sleep, the way her people had killed my 40, and made my way back through the tunnels toward my own lines. I knew roughly the direction. I could have brought back what I had learned, the layout of these workings, the way the humans moved in the dark, the trap they had used on us. It would have been valuable. It would have helped my people win the war. It was, by every law I had ever lived by, exactly what I should have done. A Veshtal officer does not lie in the enemy's care growing strong on the enemy's water and then walk meekly back into captivity. He acts. He fights. He turns even his own, dying into a weapon for his people. That is what I had been my whole life. That is what Spear of the 4th line meant. And there came a night, the 4th night, with the voices fatting down the tunnel and her small heart beating against my arm in the dark when I lay there and I genuinely considered it. I want to be honest. I considered it. I thought, her weapon is right there. She trusts me. It would be quick, and I would be doing my duty. And then she shifted in the dark, half asleep, and she did a thing she had taken to doing. She reached over without waking, and she touched my arm just to check, just to feel that the hurt thing she was keeping alive was still breathing. A small unconscious touch, the kind you give to someone you have decided to keep safe. And in the dark she murmured something, and the word she murmured was my name, the soft, broken version of it, Kara. Like even in her sleep she was keeping track of me, like I had become, somehow, one of the living things she would not let the war have. And I could not do it. I lay there in the dark with the means to kill her a hand's reach away, and my whole life telling me it was my duty, and I could not do it, and I have spent 200 years understanding why, and I think it is this. She had made me a person, not a soldier, not a Veshtal, not spear of the fourth line. A person, a single, particular, breathing thing that she had decided to save, and in deciding it she had somehow made it true. You cannot easily murder someone who has insisted on seeing you as worth saving. It is one of the strange powers humans have, and they do not even know they have it. By refusing to let the war be the last word about me, she had made it impossible for me to let the war be the last word about her. So I did not take the weapon. I lay still. And in the morning she shared the cup with me again, and never knew, to this day she never knew, how close I had come, or that the not doing of it was the first truly free choice I had made in my whole long life. Every choice before it had been the numbers, the duty, the certainty. That one was mine. But choices have weight, and a war does not stop for two enemies learning each other's names in a hole. And on the sixth day, the war found us. I will tell you how. I will tell you what happened when her people came back, and they did come back, and they found the alien soldier alive in the dark, and the human who had been keeping him so. I will tell you about the moment on the surface, in the gray light and the falling ash, when everything I had learned in that hole was put to the only test that ever mattered, when I had to choose, in front of both our peoples, what kind of thing I was going to be. But that, my friend, is the end of the story, and the end of a story should never be rushed. So hold the cup in your mind, the dented cup shared in the dark between enemies. Hold her hand on my arm, checking in her sleep that the hurt thing still breathed. Hold the choice I did not make, the weapon I did not take. And come back and I will tell you how it ended, and what I did, when the war finally caught up to us both, that I have never once regretted, and that cost me everything I had been, and gave me everything I became. Her name was Wren Halloway. I am almost done telling you why I have never stopped saying it. On the sixth day the war found us, and it did not come quietly. I heard it before she did, which surprised us both. My hearing had come back as my strength returned, and there was a sound far up in the workings, a deep grinding rhythm I knew in my bones. Veshtal cutting machines. My people had not given up on the hills. They were boring down into the mines from above, opening the tunnels we had failed to take, coming for the humans the proper way, the slow way, soldier against soldier through the rock. And they were coming down on top of us. Wren heard it then too. I watched her face change in the little flame light. She knew what it meant. It meant her people would be caught between the Veshtal coming down from above and whatever waited below, and it meant that here, in this pocket of the dark, the war was about to walk through the wall. She made a decision. I saw her make it. She had kept me hidden for 6 days, kept me secret, kept me safe, but the cutting machines changed everything, and she knew it. If the Veshtal broke through and found a wounded officer of their own being kept by a human, they would not understand it as mercy. They would understand it as a hostage, as a humiliation, as a thing to be answered in blood. And if her own people found her sheltering the enemy, it would go no better. There was no version of the war breaking into that chamber that did not get one or both of us killed. So she did the bravest thing I saw in the whole war, and I have already told you I saw a great deal of bravery. She decided to get me out, to get me back to my own people herself, to walk her enemy out of the dark and hand him back, even though it meant walking toward the Veshtal lines, even though there was no reason on that whole cold world for her to do it, except the one reason that governed everything she did, that she had decided to keep this hurt thing alive, and getting it killed at the last by the very war she had been hiding it from would have been, to her, a kind of failure she could not accept. She got me up. I could stand by then, barely, leaning on her, the two of us a strange, staggering shape in the dark, the tall gray soldier and the small human holding him up. And she led me out, away from the cutting machines, through passages she knew and I did not, toward the surface, toward the edge of the mines where the tunnels opened onto the gray light and the falling ash, and beyond them the Veshtal lines. We came up into the open near the end of it. I had not seen the sky in 6 days. The ash was falling, soft and gray, the way it had fallen the whole campaign, and the cold came into me, and there, across a stretch of broken ground, were my own people. A Veshtal forward line, soldiers I might have known. And they saw us, a human, holding up a wounded Veshtal, walking out of the human mines into the open. And they raised their weapons, because what else do you do in a war when the enemy walks out of the ground holding one of your own? And at the same moment, from behind us, from the mouth of the tunnel, came human voices. Her people. They had heard the cutting machines, they were moving, and they came up into the gray light behind us, and they saw it too, saw Ren, one of theirs, out in the open holding up the enemy, and they did not understand it either, and some of them raised their weapons as well. So there we stood, the two of us in the falling ash, in the broken middle ground between two peoples who had been killing each other for 4 months, with weapons leveled at us from both sides, and not one creature on that whole field who understood what they were looking at. I want you to picture it because it is the picture I have carried for 200 years. The gray light, the ash, the small human holding up the tall gray soldier, and the silence, that terrible held silence of a great many fingers resting on a great many triggers, waiting for someone to move first. And I understood in that silence that this was the choice. This was the only choice that had ever mattered in my whole life. Everything before it had been the numbers. This was mine. Because here is what I could have done. I could have done my duty. I could have, even now, even half broken, even held up by her arm, I could have turned on her, struck her down, stepped away from the human and toward my own line and let them cut her down where she stood, the human who had hidden an enemy. It would have been understood. It would have been right by every law of the Veshtal. I would have walked back into my people's arms a returning officer, and they would have finished the humans in the hills, and called down the heavy ships if the ground proved too costly, and unmade Bridgewater and the mines and the whole stubborn colony from orbit, and the war would have ended the way our wars always ended, and in 2 generations no one would have remembered that a world called Tarn's Reach had ever held out at all. Or I could be the thing she had spent 6 days, without ever saying so, teaching me how to be. I let go of her. I stood on my own, it cost me, but I stood and I stepped, not away from her but in front of her, between Ren Halloway and the leveled weapons of my own people. A wounded Veshtal officer, standing in the falling ash, shielding a human with his own body, facing his own soldiers. And I spoke. I had the rank to be heard and I used it for the last time. I will not give you the speech because there was no speech. There is no time for speeches when fingers are on triggers. I said the only thing that mattered in the loudest voice my broken body had. I said, this one is under my protection. This one kept me alive. Lower your weapons. That is an order and I will give my name and my rank to answer for it. There was a silence after that you could have cut with a blade. I did not know if they would obey. I want you to understand, I genuinely did not know. It was possible they would simply shoot through me to get at the human, and through her to end the strangeness of it, and report that the officer had been lost to wounds, and no one would ever have known the difference. I stood there in the ash with my back to her, and her weapons-bearing people behind her, and my own soldiers in front of me. And I waited to find out whether anything I had learned in that dark hole would survive contact with the world above it. It survived barely, but it survived. A Veshtal weapon lowered. Then another. Old soldiers, it was the old ones, always the old ones, the ones who had seen enough war to be tired of it. Old soldiers lowered their weapons, because an officer they had no reason to disbelieve had given his name and his rank to shield a creature with his own body. And even in the Veshtal, even in a people who let the numbers be the last word, that meant something. That had to mean something. If it did not mean something, then nothing meant anything, and they were just killers in the cold. And no soldier, however hard, wants to believe that of himself at the end of a long bad war. The weapons came down, on both sides, because the humans, seeing the Veshtal hold their fire over Ren, held theirs too, the strange arithmetic of a standoff resolving the only way it can, with everyone slowly deciding at once that they would rather not be the one who started the dying again. And in that gap, that small held gap of weapons lowered and triggers eased, I did the last thing my rank ever let me do. I sent word up the line. I demanded to speak to Veshel Tovish. And when they brought me to him, a wounded officer they thought lost, returned from the enemy's own ground, I told him the truth, all of it, the 40 I had lost, the dark, the water, the cup, the human who had dragged her enemy through the bodies of her enemies rather than let a hurt thing die alone. And I told him the thing I had learned that the calculators could not measure. I told him, these people will not yield, not because they are fools, but because they have something we lost so long ago we forgot we ever had it. They would rather die as themselves than live as us. And a people like that you cannot conquer. You can only kill them, all of them, every last one. Down to the children in the doorways. And even then you have not won, because you have not made them yield. You have only made the galaxy a poorer place by one of the few peoples in it who knew what a person is worth. I do not know, even now, exactly what moved in Tovish that day. He was a hard creature and I did not love him. But he was an old soldier too, and he had been counting his own dead for 4 months, and somewhere in him the numbers had stopped adding up to anything he could stand. The heavy ships did not come down. The order to unmake the colony was never given. Tovish withdrew us from the hills, and then from Bridgewater, and then, slowly over weeks, with the kind of grinding reluctance with which a great machine reverses from the world. The official record says the campaign was concluded by negotiated settlement. That is the coward's version. The true version is that a small, tired human in a hole in the ground changed the mind of one wounded officer, and that officer changed the mind of one tired old commander, and that was enough. That is all it ever takes. One mind and then one more. The galaxy turns on smaller hinges than you would think. Tarn's Reach was never conquered. The 40,000 humans on it lived. Their grandchildren do not speak Veshtal. They speak their own tongue on their own cold gray world under their own banners, and they say the name of the place with that soft sound at the end, like a sigh. And they do not know, most of them will never know, how close it came to being unmade, or that it was saved by a dented tin cup shared in the dark between 2 enemies. They paid me for it, of course, my people, not in coin, in the only currency the Veshtal had ever dealt in. I lost my rank. Spear of the 4th line was struck from the rolls. I was not executed, Tovish saw to that, his last kindness, but I was set aside, made nameless in the way my people made the ones who broke the order nameless, the wise yielding turned against me. I have lived the rest of my long life as an outcast among my own kind, a veteran with no rank and no line, an old soldier who let the numbers be wrong. I have never once regretted it. I saw Ren one more time before they took me away from that world. They let me, I think because even my guards did not quite know what to do with the strangeness of it. She came to where I was being held. She was thin and tired, and the cut over her eye had healed to a pale line she would carry the rest of her life. We still did not share much language. We did not need much. We had learned each other in the dark, and that is a thing that does not need many words. She had the cup with her, the dented tin cup, and she pressed it into my hands, my huge gray hands that had killed more living things than there are stars you can count from your homeworld. She pressed that small battered cup into them and closed my fingers around it. And she said in her own tongue the words I had first heard her say kneeling beside me in the dark, the words I now understood. She said, "It's okay. I've got you." And then she said one thing more, slow, so I would understand it, the most words she ever said to me at once. She said, "Don't forget us. Whatever you go back to, don't forget that we were real." I have not forgotten. That is the whole of it in the end. That is the thing the alien veteran learned about humans on the battlefield, and it is not the thing I expected, and it is not the thing you expected, and it took me 200 years to be able to say it plainly. I went to that world certain that strength was the power to make others yield. I came back knowing that strength is the refusal to let the war be the last word, about your enemy, about a stranger, about a hurt thing in the dark that has every reason to be left to die. The humans were never the strong ones because they fought hard, though they fought harder than anyone. They were the strong ones because, in the middle of the worst thing that can happen to a people, a small tired creature with blood on her hands knelt down beside the very thing that had broken her world and decided that it was still worth saving. We could break their world. We could not break that. Nothing can break that. That is the thing the calculators will never measure on any world in any war for as long as the galaxy turns. I am old now. My hands shake when I hold the cup, but I hold it every day. I drink from it every morning the way she drank from it in the dark after my enemy's mouth had touched it, because we were both thirsty and we were both, underneath everything, the same kind of thing. And every morning when I drink, I say her name out loud, into the empty room, so that one creature in this whole hard galaxy will not forget that she was real. Ren Holloway. She kept her enemy alive in the dark. And in doing it without ever knowing it, she taught a killer how to be a person, and saved a world, and one old soldier's soul, with a dented cup of water and the simple, stubborn, impossible human refusal to let anyone die alone. I have told it true now, I can rest.